You've seen them cast as saviors of the oppressed and villains of every headline. They call themselves the vanguard of Islam, but do their banners herald liberation or new chains? Beneath righteous slogans and social services, a question burns. Can divine politics escape the corruption of power? I'm Fakir al-Kamosh. In this series, we dive into the seductive world of Islamist movements, from Brotherhood's ballot boxes to Hezbollah's bunkers and Hamas's tunnels, disturbing the quiet certainties you thought you knew about faith and force. Are you ready to confront the mirror they hold up to every believer? Section 1. The Birth of Political Islam, a Revolt of Conscience. In post-colonial Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood arose, 1928, as an antidote to Western materialism and corrupt elites. Hassan al-Banna insisted Islam was not a private creed, but a total system, governing soul and state alike. His dream? A people resurrected through charity rounds and Quranic study, then mobilized for power. Charity or coercion? Brotherhood's roadside clinics and schools won hearts where regimes failed. But was this generosity a pure act of mercy, or a velvet glove hiding an iron fist? Each orphan fed, each patient healed, added another knot in a network that demanded loyalty more than gratitude. The allure of total sovereignty. Unlike secular parties chasing fragmented votes, Brotherhood promised a unified identity, Muslim first, citizen second. This radical clarity of purpose electrified the faithful, but also flattened every nuance of individual conviction into one political category. If faith truly commands every sphere of life, can it tolerate pluralism? Or does the moment politics wear the cloak of religion, dissent become heresy, and debate become betrayal? When divine mandates meet human ambition, perfectionism morphs into dogmatism, and the soul's freedom turns into ideological prison. When the roar of liberation struggles fades, what echoes remain? Hezbollah presents itself as the iron fist defending Shia dignity, but is its theology of resistance a path to emancipation or a ritual of perpetual siege that cages both oppressor and oppressed? Let's probe the contradictions of a movement that marries Quranic prophecy with guerrilla tactics, and whose social services can feel like both salvation and subjugation. In 1982, amid Beirut's rubble, Shia communities looked to Iran's revolution as both blueprint and beacon. The Islamic Republic's guardian jurist doctrine, Wilayat al-Faqih, offered a sacred mandate, an infallible religious leader guiding both mosque and militia. Hezbollah was born at that intersection, where faith justified arms and arms enforced faith. Hospitals, schools, reconstruction committees, Hezbollah's shadow government stitches together a parallel state. For many Shia, it's lifeline in a landscape of marginalization. Yet each service builds allegiance. Aid becomes obligation, gratitude becomes obedience. When charity coexists with hidden checkpoints and informants, benevolence shades into patronage. Suicide bombings and roadside IEDs are cast as shahada, the ultimate worship. But what happens when the human cost mounts, and the holy warrior becomes indistinguishable from the criminal? Theologically, martyrdom is exalted. Philosophically, it begs the question, does killing in God's name affirm divine justice or expose the hollowness of any creed grown violent? Hezbollah's self-image as protector of the Ummah clashes with its role in Lebanon's sectarian conflicts. By mobilizing Shia identity against Christians, Sunnis, even other Shia factions, it fragments the very unity it claims to defend. In seeking to shield one community, it erects walls that imprison the nation. When violence becomes sacralized, can dissent itself be deemed blasphemy? Hezbollah's critics, Shia scholars, and secular activists are branded apostates or agents of foreign powers. Thus, the circle closes. Resistance to oppression justifies oppression of critics. The guardians become jailers of conscience. Emerging from the rubble of the First Intifada, Hamas fused nationalist fervor with Quranic rhetoric, building tunnels beneath Gaza and weaving transcendence into every brick. But is their resistance a courageous stand against occupation, or an infinite loop that imprisons both oppressor and oppressed in cycles of violence? Let's descend into the contradictions of a movement where martyrdom is marketed and liberation becomes a ritual of perpetual siege. In 1987, young Palestinians hurled stones at tanks. Their anger found structure in the Muslim Brotherhood's Gaza branch. Hamas's charter married Islamic revivalism to anti-colonial struggle, promising that Allah is our goal, the Prophet our leader, the Quran our constitution. This uncompromising formula drew recruits yearning for both national dignity and cosmic meaning. Beneath bombed-out streets, Hamas's tunnel network became both lifeline and weapon. Tunnels smuggled essentials, food, medicine, but also operatives and rockets into and out of Gaza. Philosophically, these subterranean passages embodied a dual truth: the human spirit's creative defiance and the claustrophobic logic of siege. Dig deeper when the horizon disappears. Social services, clinics, schools, welfare payments win hearts under Hamas rule. Yet each aid envelope carries an unspoken covenant: loyalty to the movement. When refusing allegiance can mean losing medical care or a permit to work, charity morphs into instrument of control. Liberation rhetoric can thus slip into a new form of social captivity. Suicide bombers and rocket launches are glorified as shahada, martyrdom for God and nation. Posters of the martyrs adorn walls, and families receive honorific medals. But when death becomes the ultimate escape from oppression, life's sanctity is eroded. An entire generation is conditioned to see self-sacrifice as the highest form of agency. Gaza's recurring wars, 2008, 2014, 2021, reveal a grim arithmetic. Each bout of violence inflicts devastation, then resets the clock for the next uprising. The cycle sustains purpose, but at what cost? Philosophically, when resistance becomes identity, defeat becomes unthinkable and dialogue impossible, trapping the community in an echo chamber of grievance. Can a movement survive if its raison d'etre is never fulfilled? True liberation demands not just expelling an occupier, but building alternative structures of justice and human dignity. When a cause is defined by resistance alone, it risks becoming a shrine to suffering rather than a pathway to life. All three movements, Brotherhood, Hezbollah, Hamas, claim to speak for Islam, yet each wields vastly different tools: ballots, bullets, tunnels. But beneath tactics lie a common root: the promise of total authority over both heart and home. Today we ask, which is the real mark of leadership: feeding souls with faith or controlling needs through service? And is that distinction more illusion than reality? Total vision of Islam. Each derives legitimacy by asserting Islam as a complete system, no separation between mosque and state. Whether through social services or armed struggle, all seek to replace secular order with divine governance. Cult of obedience. They cultivate loyalty, not as voluntary devotion, but as binding covenant. Brotherhood's bay'ah becomes membership card. Hezbollah's social networks demand allegiance. Hamas's aid is conditional on unwavering support. In each case, faith colors into fealty. feeding faith. Brotherhood emphasizes Quranic literacy and moral reform, aiming to cultivate enlightened consciences that choose piety. Their challenge: literacy is slow, hearts are not easily commanded. Controlling needs: Hezbollah and Hamas master basic needs, healthcare, education, fuel rations, translating dependency into power. When survival hinges on movement's goodwill, freedom becomes a luxury few can afford. Ballot box. Theology. Brotherhood's electoral gains demonstrate that many Muslims see politics as a form of worship. Yet, when elected officials fail, movements face existential crisis. Stripped of services, they risk losing both power and purpose. Gunpoint governance. Hezbollah's and Hamas's coercive models can deliver stability or terror, independent of public consent. But sustained governance through fear breeds resentment, fueling underground dissent that can erupt violently. The shepherd's paradox. A true leader guides rather than herds, invites rather than compels. When movements feed souls, they risk intangible success. When they manage needs, they risk tangible control. Both can masquerade as liberation, but which creates genuine freedom? Freedom's dilemma. In demanding absolute obedience, these groups echo the very authoritarianism they claim to oppose. The paradox: resisting one form of tyranny can birth another. Devotion becomes discipline, justice becomes judgment, community becomes cage. If the goal is not merely to replace corrupt rulers, but to nurture human dignity, must power always bind? Or can true Islamic authority be exercised in a sphere where neither ballots nor bullets hold coercive sway, but where conscience itself remains sovereign? Every empire births its critics, those branded heretics for daring to question the sacred order. Within the Brotherhood, Hezbollah, and Hamas, courageous voices have risen to expose hypocrisy and propose an Islam unshackled from coercion. What do these dissenters teach us about faith's true power, and can their vision rescue politics from becoming a new tyranny? Mustafa Mashhur's sons versus young reformers. While leadership clung to doctrinal rigidity, younger members in Egypt and Tunisia pressed for pluralism and women's rights, arguing that an Islamic state must guarantee freedom of conscience. Labeled Western stooges, they were expelled, yet their writings survive as blueprints for participatory Islam. Critique from Qom and Beirut. Scholars connected to Hezbollah's seminary at Najaf began publishing essays on the dangers of militarizing religion, urging a return to quietist scholarship and social welfare without arms. Branded as apostates, many fled or faced imprisonment, but their call echoes. Religion thrives in the mosque, not the barracks. Voices from the darkness. In Gaza's jails, inmates penned laments against leadership's corruption and the misuse of relief funds. Smuggled verses speak of reimagining resistance as community building, schools, cooperatives, dialogue with neighbors, turning tunnels of war into tunnels of hope. Ibn Taymiyyah's warning. Centuries ago, he condemned forcing non-Muslims to convert, insisting faith must spring from free assent. Modern dissenters invoke his legacy to challenge any movement that compels loyalty at gunpoint or bureaucratic decree. True Islam, they argue, blooms only in the soil of free will. Post-Islamist currents. In Turkey and Malaysia, thinkers like Abdullah Öcalan, amid controversy, and Fazlur Rahman advocated models where Islam informs ethics but doesn't monopolize power, proposing coalitions, constitutional checks, and civic virtues as pathways to justice without theocratic rule. Dissenters remind us that the legitimacy of power rests on voluntary allegiance, not coerced compliance. They pose a radical question. If Islam's moral authority depends on persuasion, can any claim to political dominance ever be truly Islamic? In their struggle, faith transcends factions, pointing toward a polity where the soul's freedom is as sacred as communal solidarity. In the corridors of power, ideology is a tool, and Islamist movements have proven irresistibly useful. From Cairo to Tehran, Washington to Riyadh, governments cultivate, co-opt, and crush brotherhoods, Hezbollahs, and Hamasis to suit strategic aims. Yet when the pious become pawns, who truly holds authority? The man with the gun or the man pulling its strings? Let's expose the geopolitical alchemy that turns faith into a commodity. The Brotherhood state sponsors Nasser's sinister pact. Gamal Abdel Nasser initially courted the Muslim Brotherhood to undermine the monarchy, then turned on them when their popular network threatened his regime. A lesson in realpolitik. When movements outgrow their usefulness, rulers label them terrorists, imprison leaders, and co-opt survivors into state-run charities. Gulf money and media, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have bankrolled official Brotherhood offshoots to counter political Islam's revolutionary edge, funding rosters of preachers who denounce uprisings, producing TV channels that recast the Brotherhood as a moderate, palace-friendly NGO. Hezbollah's patronage puzzle, Tehran's lifeline. Since 1982, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has fed Hezbollah with funds, weapons, and training, transforming a Lebanese militia into a regional power broker. Yet this symbiosis binds Hezbollah's strategy to Tehran's geopolitical designs, compelling it to open fronts against Israel or back Assad in Syria, regardless of Lebanese public opinion. Syrian sanctuary. Bashar al-Assad's regime shelters Hezbollah's fighters and logistics in return for sectarian militias to crush dissent. Lebanese social programs expand, but under the watchful eye of Syrian security forces, ensuring the party's survival hinges on foreign patronage, not grassroots legitimacy. Hamas and the Gaza Gambit. Qatar's quiet cash. Doha's emissaries funnel reconstruction funds into Gaza, only a fraction reaching civilian projects, while weapons procurement and tunnel networks thrive behind the scenes. By toggling between funding and isolation, Qatar wields Hamas as both a bargaining chip and a strategic asset in its regional rivalry with Riyadh. Egypt's open-closed border. Cairo alternately seals the Rafah crossing to strangle Hamas's economy, then reopens it to relieve humanitarian crises. Each decision dictated not by compassion, but by Egyptian intelligence's calculus of pressure and appeasement. Superpower shadows, U.S. arms and amnesty, Washington arms, authoritarian allies in the name of counterterrorism, tacitly accepting Brotherhood crackdowns in Egypt, or Hezbollah's exclusion from dialogue as collateral for strategic basing rights and oil deals. Meanwhile, bipartisan politicians chant democracy on talk shows, exposing the cynicism that fuels radicalization. Russian realpolitik. Moscow's embrace of Assad and tacit tolerance of Hezbollah's operations in Syria highlights another motive: preserving influence in the Levant. By portraying itself as the only power capable of defeating jihadists, Russia reins in extremist splinter groups but props up state-aligned militias. When movements exchange divine mandate for state largesse, they surrender moral independence. The line between patron and puppet blurs. Is Hezbollah defending Shia honor or Iran's strategic depth? Is Hamas resisting occupation or serving as a proxy for Gulf rivalries? Islamist movements often promise emancipation, but find themselves shackled to foreign agendas. True authority requires autonomy from worldly masters. When faith serves as a bargaining chip, every mosque becomes a theater of geopolitical intrigue, and the faithful become spectators, not sovereigns of their own destiny. When Islamist movements cross oceans, they carry more than ideology. They bring their conflicts, hierarchies, and scars to unfamiliar soil. In Western democracies, Brotherhood chapters, Hezbollah cells, and Hamas supporters navigate between solidarity and suspicion. Are these diasporas threads that strengthen the global ummah, or spark plugs igniting xenophobia and civil strife? Community hubs or intelligence targets? Mosque-based Brotherhood study circles and cultural centers once served as safe spaces for worship and social services. Today, they're shadowed by undercover agents and public fear, turning seekers of faith into suspects under surveillance. When state watchers outnumber imams, spiritual sanctuary morphs into panoptic prison. Overseas remittances, funds sent to families in Lebanon or Gaza, can uplift communities or underwrite militias. Western donors, proud of their philanthropy, may unwittingly finance violence. The line blurs. Is your zakat a lifeline for the needy or a tributary to proxy wars? Advocacy or intimidation? Diaspora organizations lobby parliaments for humanitarian relief, but their rhetoric can slip into ultimata: support our cause or face our displeasure. When demands for policy shifts echo demands for doctrinal conformity, pluralistic discourse gives way to coercive politics in democratic halls. Muslim minorities or fifth columns? Each terror attack in the Middle East reverberates in European streets, stoking Islamophobia. Peaceful Muslims find themselves interrogated. Which side are you on? The result is a toxic feedback loop. Radical elements thrive on alienation, while moderates are squeezed between radical suspicion and mainstream mistrust. The exile's paradox. In seeking to preserve identity, diaspora movements risk fossilizing their faith, clinging to battles past rather than engaging realities present. Authentic solidarity demands empathy, not enclave politics. True belonging emerges when diaspora Muslims shape local narratives without importing foreign fault lines. We began by asking if faith turned political can emancipate or entrap. Now we face the ultimate mirror. When movements promise divine freedom, yet bind followers to ideology and patronage, who is truly free? In this finale, we weigh power and piety, liberation and leash, to see whether political Islam can ever escape its own chains. Uniformity over unity. Brotherhood's insistence on doctrinal purity, Hezbollah's sectarian monopoly, Hamas's absolute control, all demand conformity. Dissent becomes heresy, debate becomes betrayal. True unity blossoms in diversity. These factions prune it into a single acceptable form. Who holds the leash? When states fund, arm, or co-opt movements, loyalty shifts from divine mandate to political patron. Principle gives way to pragmatism. Leaders flip positions to appease sponsors, and believers barter their conscience for services. Resistance as identity. For many, struggle defines self. Victory and defeat become spiritual milestones. But when life's meaning hinges on endless resistance, trauma becomes tradition. Renewal would demand building rather than blasting, constructing institutions that outlive conflict. Freedom of conscience. Islam's highest authority is God's judge alone. Every heart carries a spark of divine decree, unmediated by earthly rulers. When political movements forget that, they substitute human will for divine guidance, imprisoning souls in worldly agendas. Perhaps the only revolt worthy of the name is the one within, rejecting every claim that faith must bow to party or patron. Emancipation lies not in capturing power, but in surrendering the ego's demand to possess it, letting the Quran and conscience be the sole guide.